All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you out there in the interwebs here, coming to you live on another Thursday edition of This Week in Drones. Hopefully, it's hitting all channels now, loud and clear. I am here with some of my favorite people in this industry. I'm going to pull this up for a second here. Michelle Duquette, 3 Mad Air, Greg Reverdiau with the Pilot Institute, one of the brilliant minds in the industry, both two brilliant minds in the industry. I wanted to just briefly shout out before we deep dive this part 2 session. We did one a few weeks ago. This is part 2. We're talking about this BV loss NPRM, this notice of proposed rulemaking from the FAA that's going to really help guide us into the future of drone delivery. But there's some baby steps we need to take along the way, and we're going to tease that out a little bit today. Before we dive into that, quick shout out to our flight crew, my man, Andrew Bowen. Go chat with this guy. He's incredible. He showed me all kinds of things he's doing with digital twins and drones and TAC and all this crazy stuff based in California. So thanks for your help on the podcast, Andrew. You're awesome. Just want to shout out to you, my man. And then with that, Michelle, if you want to do an intro, just so folks out there know, I mean, many folks already recognize you, know you from the pod, but just feel free to share like who you are, the lens that you're bringing to today's conversation, and then same thing for Greg, and then I'll kind of kick it off with some comments, and we'll just banter from there. But yeah, go for it, Michelle.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. As many of you know, I've been here for a very long time, 35 years, and spent most of that time with kind of inside the FAA's think tank, the MITRE Corporation. And my lens is all about interoperability from a NASA enterprise perspective. And I'm constantly looking for ways that we are trying to push the envelope where I know that there's a gap. And so in the NPRM, we have a really good start at performance-based rulemaking. I applaud that loudly. However, there are some areas that are not perfect, and in some cases may have unintentional consequences. So I'm really hoping that we can. There's too many pockets of this NPRM for us to cover just even in 2 sessions, but maybe we can hit some of the more the ones that have an opportunity to be adjusted in the common adjudication window. So that's the lens that I'm bringing today.
Awesome. And that window is closing October 6th. And anyone out there listening to this can jump on, read this notice of proposed rulemaking if you're crazy. Or, it's many, hundreds of 600, 700 pages, but you are free to comment as well. So I want to help encourage that. That's the point of all these shows, to kind of talk and encourage that before that window closes. With that, Greg, I want to pass it to you just to share who you are, who you're with, but also just like give us a little bit of a window into the last few weeks leading up to today regarding like the Pilot Institute and accumulating thoughts and comments from many hundreds or even thousands of constituents that you guys represent, that are actually sending you comments that you've curated that you're going to be turning in here. I think you said tomorrow. And so just like take us into your world for a second, and then after that, guys, we're gonna hit all a handful of key topics: civil interest, like law enforcement drones, how they're interacting, or how they're represented or not represented in this. We're talking about all sorts of things. We'll list it out. But go ahead, Greg. Who are you? Awesome. Bring us into your world for a second. Thank you so much for joining the podcast again for a second time. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, I think there was a great conversation last time, so I'm excited to be back and finish that up. From my perspective, I've been in aviation not as long as Michelle, but I've been in the flight training world pretty much my whole adult life. I've been a flight instructor for 22 years now. I managed flight schools before I did Pilot Institute. And of course, we've been training a lot of pilots. We've trained over 450,000 people now. We're getting close to 500,000 people trained on the On the commercial drone side, we've trained about a quarter of all remote pilots in the United States. And so these are the people that I listen to. You know, we have live shows that we do every week answering people's questions, and we're very close to our base. And so we understand what people do with drones every single day, whether they're individual operators or they're working for Fortune 500 companies or they're working for public safety. We know we train all of these people. And so when we looked at Part 108, I'm kind of a geek. I love aviation regulation. I know it sounds weird, but I do like reading the regs. And this is what you do as a flight instructor. You know, if when you're a flight instructor, you every year, I remember before we had, I hate to say before we had internet, because before we had all of the regulation online live, we would buy the FAR AIM and we would sit down as flight instructors and we would go through all the changes. They would show you every year, you know, on the side, there was a black line that said, this is the new regulation and you have to follow all these things. And so I've learned to read those regs. And so we did this for Part 108, just like we did for the NPR and for Remote ID and for Part 107. And just learn a lot about this whole thing, trying to read it. How is this going to affect performance? How is this going to affect day-to-day operation for our members, you know, for our customers, our students? And what we found is that they're not included in this proposal. And so this is what we spend the last month. It feels like 2 years now because I'm so sick of Part 108 of reading and trying to wrap my head around it. But we've talked to a lot of folks. We actually talked also on the manned aircraft sides. We talked to AOPA, VAI, EAA, and NBA. They have a group that they put together, and I was lucky enough to be invited to talk to them and bring them the perspective from the drone side as well. Obviously, we train aircraft pilots as well, and I fly. Pilot Institute has an airplane. I'm a pilot. I fly airplanes, and so I have skin in both sides. I want to make sure that we can operate our drone safely, but I also want to make sure that we don't become an issue for manned aircraft operators. And so I was able to work with this group of manned aircraft pilots and kind of, talked about how is this going to affect their operation. And so they have a comment coming out, a joint comment. We met with a group of recreational and commercial entities, the Drone Service Providers Alliance. We the Drone Advisory Council. We had Flight Test, which is a big recreational group. Also, the FPV Freedom Coalition. Aloft is also in our group. And so we kind of put our heads together and came up with a proposal. We made a long video explaining what the proposal was, and I think we talked about it some last time we were here. But that's as quickly as I can summarize what our involvement has been is really trying to talk to as many people as we can to see if we can find a solution that works for everyone.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. And folks out there that are listening, if you're here while we are live, October 2nd, here at 1 p.m. Eastern, then feel free to send in your thoughts and comments based on what these folks are sharing today, because you got them in the hot seat right now. If you want to throw some questions, some comments, your thoughts, your feedback, your pushback on any of these topics, please do send them in the comments. But with that said, I'm sure I can see Michelle's gears spinning as well. I just have a personal spin-off question off of what you just shared, which is this whole thing of right of way between manned aircraft and drones. And I've heard both sides of who should give right of way to who in that low altitude, right? Meaning should a manned aircraft give way to a drone that's delivering, blood or whatever the case? Is there an instance in that below 400 feet where that might be the case, where they have to actually pay attention while they're flying physically, and see the drone or detect it somehow and actually get out of its way? I mean, which is how I think it's currently written, right? Is that correct? Versus, is that even humanly possible? And you talked about that in one of your last videos from 2 weeks ago that I really enjoyed, where it sounded like in that video you said it should be the other way around, that drones should give right of way to manned aircraft even in that low altitude. I'm like, okay, where's that sitting right now? Because you've met with both stakeholders now. Is there a case where a manned aircraft would have to give way to a drone in your world? What do you think?
I've thought about it a lot. I don't see a situation where an unmanned aircraft should have priority over a manned aircraft. For me, I look at it from a piloting perspective. I don't operate below 1,000 feet unless I'm landing at an airport, because I fly airplanes. I don't fly helicopters, but there are a lot of helicopters that fly below 500 feet to do critical missions that are very, very brain intensive. They take a lot of resources. I've been at 1,000 feet and I've seen birds. Birds have been, birds are smart enough that sometimes they get out of the way of airplanes, but sometimes they don't. And they're hard enough to see because you're looking at them from high up. You're looking down into the ground, and they're very difficult to see. You can see them up in the air in the sky because they're over the blue sky, just like a drone would be fairly easy to spot. But once you mesh them with the rest of the stuff, and birds move. Birds are like you will eventually see them when you get close enough because they move, but drones can be hovering. And if the drone hovers, there is no way that a helicopter pilot is going to have the mental capability to see them and avoid them and make the decision by the time they see them to avoid them. So that's the way that I look at it from a piloting perspective. We're asking a lot of people that are already in situation where they're not overloaded, but they're pretty loaded with cognitive tasks, and I just don't see it being a safe thing. Now, there is obviously this electronic conspicuity thing that we talked about last week, where yes, that would be the solution, where everybody is conspicuous, everybody is visible to everybody else. If there's a big if the technology works, if the technology is available, and it's been tested. And right now it has not been tested. I think there are a few options, but we need more testing to make sure that this is actually not, make believe, and this is actually a possible situation. So I'm all for it. I think the groups, you'll see the AOPA coalition, that they mention the same thing. They say, okay, we're good with having everybody be conspicuous, but at the end of the day, there's no way that these pilots can avoid these drones because they won't be able to see them in some situations. So somebody has to convince me that drones cannot avoid an airplane and that therefore they would need to have priority. That's the bottom line.
Well, then let me offer an option. So here's the scenario. It's a public safety scenario. And public safety is, in fact, using drones. And let's say it's in an urban environment and there are known helicopter traffic there. And not all of the helicopters are executing critical missions. Now, being down at that altitude, the operation itself is critical. There is a lot going on. However, the mission may not be. It may be tourism, or it may be, whatever it is, delivering a VIP. In that case, I would offer that this is where the electronic conspicuity technology absolutely must be accelerated for that helicopter operator.
Yep.
And here's the scenario. We have made it very clear that whenever we hear a siren, we are required to pull over.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have regulation, we have laws in place that say, look, people, when you hear a siren, whether it's a fire engine or a police car, something bad's going down and they're going to help it and you need to get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, this is a precedent that we have that we can't, and we also have this in the air. You and I both know that when there's VIP movement, we do a little extra to make sure that the VIP can get to where they need to go. Same with light flights, we have those prioritizations. I would offer that we also need a level of public safety drone prioritization that gets folded into the existing airspace prioritizations, so that when a public safety operation is active, that electronic conspicuity allows for the public safety entity to know what's going on in the airspace, number one. But number two, there needs to be some kind of alert that goes out to the operators that are in that airspace, especially those helicopters at low altitude, to say, okay, heads up, this is happening at your 4 o'clock and you need to avoid this airspace.
Yep, 100%. And I think we already have that in place, by the way. If there's a forest fire, I live in near in Arizona, and we have forest fires every year. And when there's a forest fire, there's a TFR that pops up, and then that area becomes, under the control of somebody else. Now, I'm not saying that we should do a TFR necessarily in this case. We need to have some sort of temporary restriction or temporary whatever you want to call it. But I think in the concept of Operation 2.0, there is that concept. I don't remember what it's called, but it's a volume that gets kind of blocked for emergency purposes, and it's not called a TFR. And I'm all for that. I think that's a great idea. The difficulty at the moment is having the technology to let other users in the airspace know that this thing just popped. And this is an issue today. If a TFR pops up for a fire, we need to make sure that everybody in the area knows about it. And I think aircraft manufacturers can do a better job at popping that information to the pilot. They should be popping on their screen immediately, and there should be notifications. And that's true, drones or not. This is, again, forest fires is the perfect example for that. But yes, Michelle, I think that's a great use case for that.
And I would absolutely stay away from TFRs. TFRs are for hazardous situations, and what we want to be able to do is give the public safety community the flexibility to be able to use these drones as a tool in their toolbox when it is, and not, I guess we'll get into this in the NPRM, but not on the rare occasion, but as a routine operation, to be able to have that prioritization and know that there isn't going to be a struggle between them and an Amazon delivery or a VIP helicopter route. No, it's a siren, it's an alert. It's like, on our phones we get a silver alert, right? When a senior is gone missing, we have the technology to alert these aircraft. It's just a matter of us pulling it all together and making it work. I actually am kind of glad that the NPRM language came out the way it did, because it gives us that impetus to sit down and dissect this to a point where we can make meaningful actions towards what makes sense going forward.
Yeah, and I think in this case, it's not nearly as much of a priority thing where right-of-way rules would necessarily change. I think it's more of reserving that airspace for that specific operation and keeping everybody else who's not part of the operation out of it. And I think that solves who has priority over who. You just make that area visible. If you're not part of this, then you go somewhere else.
Wow, that's good. I did want to comment, Michelle. I mean, good point. I do think that, like, they put out Part 108 just as is. It needs a lot of, comments to include what we've already succeeded at up to today. It kind of paints this picture of, like, here's the future. Everything's autonomous. Go, hit the button. Everything's flying. It's all automatic. You have all, it's this crazy ecosystem that we've all dreamed of. And maybe it wasn't quite refined. There was no maybe bridge between that really cool future and like the reality of today, and where the progress we've made up to this point. And then how do we bridge between, really cool operations we're doing now, waivers we're getting now, and bridged from there to this really cool future. And like at least the administration just said, let's take what we've got, let's put it out there. And they're probably relying on us, these user groups and these thought leaders and manufacturers of radars and ground-based systems, et cetera, to inform and to build that bridge is my estimation. And that's what we're doing with all these comments. So, again, thanks for both of your time and figuring this out, teasing this out. But I think I'm hopeful on the other side, when they publish the rule, that they'll have accounted for a lot of this and really build it in and make something really solid, right? But with that, I'm just going to shout out to a couple people that are commenting. So thanks for the interaction. Mark Spence, you said something about outage on a drone, and I'd love to hear, maybe a little tease that out a little bit into a question or a thought, because I'd love to pull that up and talk to that. And Andrew Bowen, the flight crew member, he said ADSB and TAC, and that was kind of, I think, during when we were talking about how do we make that conspicuity where everyone knows where everyone else is. So, that's right on. And a couple other people are commenting as well. We'll kind of pull some of those in, but I just wanted to shout out to you guys. Love the interaction. With that said, I really wanted to hear the story that you shared, Greg. You said you're from Arizona. You mentioned earlier backstage about the Amazon delivery drones, that 2 of them in a row, one after the other, crashed into a crane there in Arizona. Was this within the last few days, I think you said?
Yeah, yesterday. There was a battery fire. Someone had to go to the hospital. I mean, really interesting timing for that. Unfortunate timing for sure. But you were highlighting, there was a handful of topics
to be addressed in the NPRM, right? That are related to this. Like, these were supposed to probably be, I don't know if they were autonomous or what, but like that's those drones flying around from an Amazon type company in mass, right? All automated is what the NPRM paints a picture of. However, you just saw, yesterday, 2 of them in a row ran into a fixed object. And so I don't know if you want to like share a little bit more about that, and we can springboard into some of the topics related to that. But I thought
Oh yeah.
that was wild.
Well, it's an uncharted object because this pops because of construction, and that happens all the time. We have NOTAMs that get issued when some of these could be an issue for large aircraft, and this one we tried to find it this morning. There was no NOTAM that we could find for this specific crane, so it must have been tall enough to make it into the NOTAM system, and but tall enough obviously for something to hit it. So 2 drones in a row within several minutes hit the crane and then came down crashing. One of them caught on fire. There's actually a video that we found this morning of one of the crew that was working on that site. And then one of them reported that somebody was taken to the hospital for ingesting the smoke, but nobody was hit, thankfully, because this is a fairly large drone when you see the pictures. But it brings up a lot of issues, and this is something that we brought up in our comment: is the need to have detect and avoid technology on these drones, regardless of where they fly, because this could have been in the middle of nowhere and it would have still been the same result. It doesn't matter the population density, because the FAA right now is looking at it in this proposal using population density as a criteria for when detect and avoid technology needs to be available on those drones. So there's two concepts the FAA has. Conformance monitoring is one of them, and then strategic deconfliction, and then detect and avoid. So conformance monitoring is making sure that the drone is doing what it's supposed to do, monitoring the performance of the drone, and then strategic deconfliction is when they're trying to make sure that between drones there is no collision, and that also is only required in some scenarios, in some situation, which I think again should be anytime, anywhere. And detect and avoid is only in a few scenarios, and it should be again available everywhere. If we're going to require it for one situation, then let's just require it for all situations. Why not? And just have that available. So to me, the failure yesterday of hitting that crane tells me that either the operator was not paying attention behind the control and not seeing a giant crane show up on the screen and not avoiding it, or if they were fully autonomous, which I don't think they're allowed to do just yet, unless there's something that I don't know. If they were allowed to fly fully autonomous, then the detect and avoid technology did not work, and so twice in a row. So that's not good. That, if we're going to be told that these drones are going to avoid a large helicopter that's flying at 100 miles an hour, but they can't detect a fixed object that's not moving, then we're not in good hands, and we need to go back to the drawing board, or we need to delay this implementation, which is what we've proposed and we've talked about before. Let's do what we know, and then let's build up to something more complex.
What I find interesting about this scenario is that I would love to have more insight into what happened right after that.
Mm-hmm.
So what did Amazon do? So this is obviously not a one-off. This is part of an orchestrated, many deliveries type operation. What happened at that point? And in our NPRM, we've got 2 operational human positions over the automation that are supposed to know what to do when something like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we aren't requiring them to have any type of formal certification.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a real big problem with anyone that is being held accountable for operational control, especially when something goes sideways and there isn't a consistency in what they know. And it's not just because I'm worried about what they might do. I'm worried about that, definitely, but I'm also worried about the safety of everyone else who are expecting that person to act in a very certain way, given the nuances and the flex of the national airspace system. you really do have to have a solid understanding of all the things that you can do and also all the things that you really cannot do. There's a reason why there's a whole bunch of redundancy built into this system, and that everyone has very intense training to help, indoctrinate that in your brain. Because when that something goes sideways, you're not going to be asking AI, and you're not going to be, flipping through SOP. You are going to be reacting based on your trained instinct. It's that conditioning.
Mhm.
And if we're all conditioned the same way, then there's a predictability that's offered into the system. When we are not trained the same way, we lose that predictability, and that's a bigger risk to safety.
Yep.
So I really think that still needs to be addressed in this NPRM
and
at some
and
level.
that's why we're requesting in our comment that the FAA comes up with an airman certification standard, which is a standard document that has been issued for everything and everyone that is certificated under the FAA. We just started doing dispatch training here at Pilot Institute. We got our approval from the FAA.
Yay.
It's 200 hours of training to be a dispatcher. This is a person that does not fly the airplane, yet we are training them to the same level of knowledge as an airline transport pilot, minus the flight training. All of the knowledge, they're taking the exact same test. It's 200 hours of required training that we're doing with them, with an approved training curriculum from the FAA. When I look at these positions that the FAA is proposing in Part 108, the flight coordinator is a dispatcher. It's a dispatcher of drones. It's gonna do even more than that, actually, because they're going to not only plan the route, make sure that the flight is legal, the weight and balance is okay. They're also going to monitor the aircraft in flight, which the dispatchers kind of somewhat do, and then reroute them, in case they need to. But we're asking 200 hours of we're asking 200 hours of training on one side, and we're asking 0 hours of training, no certificate. The FAA issues an actual certificate for dispatchers, and I put that in my comment. We need an ACS, we need an airman certification standard that everybody can play against, and then we need to make sure that there is a standardized testing. We've done standardized testing for years. Why not continue doing it with what we're doing now? And I know it sounds self-purposing because this is what we do, but this is what we do because I believe in it. I believe in
Right.
training people.
I mean, you have the perspective that others don't because you see this right every day. Go ahead, Michelle. I have one comment after that.
It's not it's your perspective is a unique perspective from a training perspective, and it's critical because you see the value of that consistent training curriculum and how that leads to the predictability and the safety of the system of systems. I happen to be one of those other people who I have that airman certification. I went through that. I lived that job. I know the criticality of the responsibility of sharing joint operational control with the pilot in command. So as operational control is designated to the certificate holder, and then they designate it down into that dispatch function, that's exactly what we're talking about here. We may have an automated system that's moving the parts around, but there's still going to be an operator certificate in those certificated operations that the NPRM calls out. And there needs to be a deliberate delegation of operational control authority to those what do they call them, flight supervisors?
Yep.
Because at some point in time, something is going to go sideways, and that's when they're going to be needed to step in and make an operational control decision. They must be trained.
Yep, flight coordinator. I never remember the term because I don't think it's a good term, but yeah, flight coordinator. Flight supervisor makes a lot more sense to me because that's what they're doing, but yeah.
Wow, interesting. So I just wanted to highlight, so we're saying the NPRM or the final rule should have higher standards for that role, that overseer of this mass automated fleet. I mean, they should be incredibly knowledgeable of the national airspace system and how it works.
Man, I understand where they were going. I mean, it was the FAA was trying to find compromise. I mean, aviation is very rigid. We've got a lot of rules, and there's a lot of training and a lot of expense that goes along with that training. So what I think they were trying to do is they were trying to reach some middle ground by saying if there is going to be this full suite of automation, then perhaps these certifications that end up costing the company, perhaps they're not as needed. And I understand that. However, I don't think I agree with that. I think that the training and that investment, it just needs to look a little bit different, but it needs to be there.
And those could be lesser roles that just run the subsystems. That could just be a coordinator that doesn't have that higher level of responsibility, but they're making sure like the software is up and running and functioning correctly, and they're helping coordinate literally between different roles or just like different subsystems. But then meanwhile, you still need that actual supervisor that has aviation knowledge and experience.
Mhm.
Now, I just want to, I don't, if you guys want to keep pushing in this direction, let's keep going. I just wanted to mention I feel, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of your comments are actually also saying, yeah, let's like not only, elevate that license or that need for certification for that person, let's also still allow there to be much simpler operations like we see today without
Mhm.
requiring any of that, essentially. Is that
Mhm.
correct? So we're almost splitting it into two, or hopefully embedding, maybe not splitting into two, but hopefully embedding within that Part 108 the roles that we see today, which is these low risk, not automated,
Yep.
right, pilot in
Yeah.
Well,
charge that
yeah.
already
Well,
has levels of. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, but I just
yeah.
want to kind of paint that for everybody. Yeah.
I'm an ACS guy. This is the way that I've learned throughout my whole life as a student pilot, all the way to becoming a commercial pilot or flight instructor. There was an ACS, it was called a PTS back then, practical test standard. These are the things that you're going to be tested on. These are the things that you need to learn. We have one for Part 107. We have an ACS, Airman Certification Standard. It gives us all of the topics that we need to teach to those candidates that are going to go apply for the exam. We have that list, actually. If you look at 108.315, it's called Personal Knowledge and Training. There's a list of 31 items that would need to be covered in training for training these required personnel. And if you look at that, the entire list that is covered in Part 107 is included in that list already. So there would be, basically, it's a 107 plus, which makes sense, makes a lot of sense. 107 is the basis, and then you add on top of it, you fly beyond visual line of sight. Well, what we've been proposing, and I mentioned it last time we met, is a rating that is added to your Part 107 certificate that would be for beyond visual line of sight flying. And we're actually proposing two different versions of it, a fully autonomous and a non-autonomous rating, depending on how you're going to operate the aircraft. If you're going to operate with basically what we call today a 107.31 waiver, a beyond visual line of sight waiver under Part 107. If you're doing this and you're staying within a certain distance, then it's a non-autonomous rating. It's fairly simple. It's an added test. You get a rating. If you want to do fully autonomous, then it's a slightly different test because it's a slightly different type of operation, but you still get a rating added to your Part 107. It doesn't cost anything. Literally, in the grand scheme of thing, the Part 107 test is very, very cheap compared to a pilot license, for example. We're talking, $300 if you include a course. If you don't have a course, it's $175. Okay, and that's 2 psi to do the testing. That's it. And but it ensures that everybody is trained on the same standards. We have a list. We have an ACS that we can follow and say, yeah, I'm going to teach you this, this, and this, and this, and then you're going to be qualified. It's very simple. We've done it for 100 years. I think we've had pilots now for maybe 50 years with the FAA. We've done this for 50 years. It works well. Why not continue doing it?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. That's great. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and dive into the civic interest regarding public safety drones. Michelle and I spent quite a lot of time with law enforcement agencies and drone responders, Charles Warner, and folks that are using drones tactically or using them for drone as first responder. They're moving more and more into this drone in the box scenario where they're dispatching a drone when they get a 911 call to a certain neighborhood. They're able to fire off a drone and it gets there in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever the case, minutes, at least, minutes before a vehicle can get to that scene. They can scope it out. They can do surveillance, make sure it's safe. They figure out that the gun is really a camera in the person's hand while they're waiting for the train in the bushes or whatever, and then that way they don't have a whole like SWAT team coming out, fire, trying to, go nuts with these guys. I mean, so these drones cause a lot of, help with safety. They help with all sorts of things, search and rescue, de-escalating, et cetera, et cetera. That's already happening today. drone as first responder. It's spreading all over the country, actually like wildfire right now. Over the last few months, like we've seen a huge hockey stick escalation of drone as first responder programs. I'm going into that to say that's now probably one of the most active, more corporate, drone organizations or like actually deploying in cities right now is law enforcement drones. That's happening far more often than delivery drones are, right? Those are only in just little pockets being tested, like in Dallas Key Site and others. So with that said, that's a huge stakeholder group that is actually, the more we've read it, is actually not included, not accounted for at all. We're talking 0% in Part 108 as it's currently written. And so that's another whole world. That's a conversation I want to have about how should law enforcement drones be included. What maybe where was it attempted to be included in this what did you say, 108.455 section? There's like section D and some others that we can hit here. But anyone, I guess, Michelle, do you want to kind of kick that off? Just we'll talk about that and go for it.
Yeah, so I get the intent, and I appreciate the intent. I guess the more I've dug into this and the more conversations I've had with public safety specifically, the more that I'm recognizing that the nuances that surround that particular sector, the operational unknown and uncertainty, it feels kind of like we are putting like a square peg round hole kind of situation, because I don't think that putting restrictions on when our public safety folks can or cannot use their drones is kind of crazy in my mind. The language in 455 says something about FAA does not intend to limit those life-saving operations and recognizes the necessity of the expeditious and precise support that civic interest unmanned aircraft operations could have on short notice relief. Recognizes that these operations may be conducted over any population density to the extent necessary to safeguard lives. However, that sentence doesn't end there. Instead, it continues with 3 more words: necessary to safeguard lives in imminent threat. Now, I would argue that probably most 99% of drone deployment is under the assumption that there may be an imminent threat to someone's life. But yet it continues on. FAA doesn't propose to define how that's determined. It's expected for these to be rare events associated with disasters or other unforeseen emergency situations. So this is where it starts going sideways for me, because the entire precedent of public safety is it's an unknown. There are uncertainties every day where they don't really know what the cause is or what the threat could be until they're there and they're in it and they're dealing with it. And that's what they're trained to do. And what this language kind of does is it kind of marginalizes that to, well, you don't really do that very often. It's really only when like there's an earthquake or a hurricane or something. But that's actually not the case. So now we're restricting saving lives with drone technology because of a need to kind of fit it in underneath this commercial NPRM. So I really am, the more I'm getting into this, the more I'm feeling that they need something separate. They need something separate that is nuanced to that particular sector and the type of unknowns and uncertainties and lack of predictability that they have to contend with like every minute of every day, not just rare occasions. That allows them also to have consistency, standard SOPs, and training, so that they are better equipped to be resilient from those uncertainties. So I'm kind of at the point now where I'm advocating, man, we need to take a separate look and do a separate needs analysis for this sector when it comes to drone use.
I mean, with that said, is it possible that that was the intent of the current NPRM by not including law enforcement drones at all in it? And it sounds like maybe they do, but then the more you read into it, it's actually just contracted companies, private sector, right? Or I mean, or companies that are contracted to cities that can do this work anyway, the emergency response work with drones. It sounds like it's actually just private, drone
But
operators that it's referring to,
yeah,
not the public safety agencies themselves. But are they locked out? I mean, is there wording in there that forces law enforcement drones to comply within the current Part 108, or is it not even referenced? Is it just
it would push them to Part 91, which is where they're
91.
operating right now, which is a band-aid. It's always been a band-aid to have them operate under that, to give them more freedom. So why not create something that already has the freedom? Again, we go back, how many of these waivers have we issued to these public safety agencies to do their job? Do we not understand right now how public safety agencies fly beyond visual line of sight? We do. We 100% do understand how they work. So let's codify this. And I think, to add to what Michelle was saying, it's very restrictive as it is right now, but also remember, Part 108, as proposed, is fully autonomous drones only. This is not how public safety uses their drones. They fly maybe to the mission, to the area, fully autonomously. DFR is the perfect example. But once they get there, somebody has to take over, and because they want to see, like you said, they want to zoom in on a lidar. They want to do more things to fly the drone on the other side, and maybe to chase a suspect, or to do. They have to have the ability to manually fly the drone. The drone is not going to make all the decisions by itself, fully autonomous, once it gets to the crime scene. So imagine and we talk about police all the time, DFRs, but think about firefighters that get to a big fire, and then now they need to go see on the other side of the building to see if the fire has spread on the other side. They're not going to do that fully autonomously. And SUI, the simplified user interface that they talk about in Part 108, isn't going to do it either. It's not going to be enough. The user needs to be able to fly. So it brings it back to our proposal. I hate to say it again, but we need to be able to manually fly these aircraft in low risk situation. It's very rare. I shouldn't say that. Outside of DFR, I think it's pretty rare for public safety agencies to fly hundreds of miles or tens of miles away from the operator. They're going to be going around a building. This is why we've had a specific type of BV loss waiver for public safety agencies. So they could go around the building, a tactical BV loss, right? And be able to see this. We should be able to codify this very easily. And this is what we attempted to do with our proposal, so that people can fly. Public safety agencies should be able to apply for a BV loss rating added to their Part 107, and then just operate this way. Why are we having a Part 91 separate process for them? We shouldn't have to. Their operation should be codified under, just like everybody else, to make their life easier. That's really the bottom line.
I love that, and it's part of, I think, why is because we that's just how we did it before. Right. So we're trying to continue down this path of having to actually manipulate every piece, when we're forgetting that we've got precedents over in the legacy side for how we get this kind of stuff done, this evolution done. Having another type rating is the most logical thing in my mind. And
Yep.
Police officers, FBI, whomever it is that needs to take the drone out of the trunk, throw it up in the air to address the situation at that moment, they need to have the authority to be able to be responsible enough to know that there are certain things that they need to be considering in the airspace. They should have communication with somebody that's going to help validate that while they are executing. They take certain precautions. These are professionals. We got to stop treating them like they aren't going to have the capacity or the capability to do that on-scene situational awareness that's necessary.
Yep. And then, in addition to this, I think from a philosophical perspective, when I look at this NPRM, we're the title, I'm going to read you the title of the NPRM, normalizing UAS beyond visual line of sight operation, right? Are we really normalizing these operations when we have an area of operation that's going to need to get approved for every single permitted operation and certificated operation? And that includes this civic interest, but it includes everybody else who's going to be operating. So we're saying that for civic interest, we're going to have that area of operation approved beforehand, because we know that there's going to be an emergency in that spot. I'm being sarcastic, but we don't know that there's going to be an area here. We need to get rid of this area of operation requirement. We need to be able to normalize, which is what this NPRM is trying to do, not turn it into another waiver process. When I look at it, it's another waiver process. Under waiver, we approve the aircraft, we approve the location, we approve the altitude, we approve the personnel, they approve everything, and we're going to do the same thing. It's not normalizing anything.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's hard to get out of that mindset. This is how they've done it. This is how they ensure that every box is addressed appropriately. However, the language that's in there, even about like ops over people, is still ambiguous, guys. I mean, it's still, and the FAA reserves the right to determine what open air assembly actually means and the risk that's associated with that, which I get. That's good. I mean, I understand that, because there are a lot of variables that need to be taken into consideration. However, you can't put that on the operator and say, well, you should know that it was an open air assembly. Well, not when it's up to the FAA to determine whether or not it was. So we still have a long way to go. This is a good start. Having a performance-based rule, I'll say it again and again. I love that we're finally getting to go down that road. We've been needing to go down it for a while now. And this is the hard part. This is that common adjudication. This is that making sure that we're having all of the different lenses and then bringing them all together and trying to figure out what that output can look like, because you can't make everyone happy. And we also can't continue to expect the FAA to do one-offs. We're way beyond that.
Yep. Meaning, so just so I understand, the idea would be you have a standard. As long as you're saying my company follows this standard that you've written down, these hundreds of pages, then you don't have to then necessarily submit for a waiver to do X, Y, and Z, as long as you are following the exact steps. You have all the certs, you have all the people in place, you have the technology in place. It's all, and you say thumbs up, we have all of that. Then that covers your risk, or that gives you sort of automatic approval that may get maybe double checked another way, but it's does versus like having to submit that entire packet and let it run through a bunch of approvals to sign off, and you're sitting there waiting. Is that the difference between sort of certificate or waivers and then versus like a standard that we just roll underneath?
Yeah, because that's what we did under 333, right? Back in the days before we had Part 107, we had a 333 approval, which meant that everybody submitted their area of operation. It goes back to the same list I just said a few minutes ago. And then it got approved. And then we went away from that. We codified it and we said, okay, if you do this, then you should be good to go. Unless you want to get out of this, then we create waivers, which we talked about last time, are a great pathway to operations. This is something that I mentioned in my comments as well. We have 8 sorts of permitted operations at the moment. I mentioned that this is actually very short-sighted, because we don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. Somebody's going to come up with a new way of using drone, and it's going to blow up in a good way, and then we're going to be using these drones, and it's not going to be codified. And there's not really any mention of waivers in Part 108 at the moment. There is no ability to waive a whole lot of things. There's a couple things, but not a ton. And so I think we made it almost like too specific with those 8 different categories. I think it should be a little bit broader. But for the area of operation, the people at the FAA that are reviewing these applications, they have a list of criteria that they follow. Okay, does this area of operation meet this requirement, just publish that, make that available, and then if you meet those requirements, then you should be able to operate safely without having somebody else verify that it's good to go. Again, learning from waivers, applying the knowledge.
And learning from legacy. So we have a very, very, very robust and proven safety management system structure
Mhm.
where you don't have to be prescriptive about how to go about doing something. It's, I have this process in place that allows me to assess all the steps that I need to take in order to reach this certain performance threshold. And as long as I show you, FAA, that I have gone through my process that you've approved, then it doesn't matter what the new disruption is. If I follow this process and I show you that I can safely mitigate the risk that's added by this new thing, then I'm good to go.
Mhm.
So we can apply that to this world now. We're smart enough now. We've got enough experience. We understand kind of the how to go about it, that we can put those safety management system principles in place and build those safety cases, and the FAA can approve them, and then we can just fly without having to get so many waivers.
Mhm.
That sounds nice. Then we can just
Do it.
fly. That's what we want to do.
And then utopia.
Exactly. Okay, so you brought up, safety management systems. That was another thing, Greg, in your video from 2 weeks ago that I really appreciated. You were talking about, again, this diverging between still being able to do, you'd like to see, operation, like manual operations that we're already doing today under Part 107, maybe allow those to continue as it is, and then yes, also require like a safety management system to be really robust within this larger sort of Amazon level, fully autonomous. But like, break that down for me. What was your thinking on that? The SMS framework, because it sounded like you said it wasn't fully necessary for the current types of operations, but it will definitely be necessary for the future. But where is that?
Yep. And the reason I don't think it's necessary for the lower types of operation is because of the requirements so SMS are codified in 14 CFR Part 5. So if you go in Part 5, you will see all of the things that you have to do to get a safety management system in place, which is very complex. And for a lot of what small operators do when they fly low risk missions manually within, extended visual line of sight, I'm going to call it, it's not really necessary. But as you get more complex, the permitted operation, actually the permitted operation do not require an SMS, only the certificated operation. So the more complex at the moment in this proposal. But what I'm actually asking the FAA is to go back to part 5 and review the safety management system requirements and modify those to create a light version of the SMS system for permitted operation for smaller operators, so that they can kind of get their feet wet with the safety management system culture. It's a culture. I've gone through that at flight schools. Managed a flight schools that had 550 students, so we had a massive safety management system in place to keep track of all the operations that we did every year. And getting your feet wet would be awesome with this. It gets people to get into the safety culture, the safety mindset, without having the added complexity that Part 5 currently has. And so I think there's a transitionary step, and I think the FAA should be leading the effort on that, and looking at what maybe other countries are doing, and what other standards do we have. How do we simplify this to make it more achievable for smaller operators?
I love that approach. Back in like, I don't know, 2012 or 2013, 14, somewhere around there, the brand new UAS integration office at the FAA actually was looking at that very thing. We had developed a tier one, tier 2, tier 3, meaning if you were the lowest risk means you were an operator that was partnered with a legacy airline or legacy aviation who has a robust SMS and a robust training program, and you know aviation, and you know how to operate, and you have some drone experience. And then the highest risk were those small operators. And what we found was that just because they are the highest risk, we can't throw all the things at them.
Mhm.
But we kind of structured it so that, okay, you're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z for now, because all of the rest of this is massively overwhelming, and it's going to be hard for you and expensive for
Yep.
you to meet those criteria. So sure, you're just coming in here. We're going to let you do these things. Get some, get some experience under your belt, and get some flight hours, and start understanding what it feels like to be in off nominal situations. And then as you're learning, you're building that safety case, and look, now you graduated to tier 2. You
Mhm.
still don't necessarily have to have legacy aviation, but you have upped your drone game. And we as the Royal FAA, um, they have a better, um, they have a higher level of trust that you you can actually handle yourself when something goes sideways.
Mhm.
So they have been thinking like that all along, but somewhere down the line, we got really in the weeds and things got overly complicated, and now we're here. And I really wish that I could go back in the bag and pull out all of those things from 10 years ago, 11,
Mhm.
12 years ago, that they are really relevant still today.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, safety as a culture should not have changed in 10 years. There's just the technology around it has changed, but there's no reason why we can't implement something simpler, even at the flight school level. Following Part 5 as a flight school, if you're a small flight school, what happens is that most don't do it at all, instead of doing a light version, which would be far better than not doing it at all. And
Yeah.
so I think this would apply to a lot of different operations. We have AAM coming around the corner, which is also going to likely have to follow SMS Part 5, which is not really
Yeah.
applicable. The FAA did it with Part 137. If you remember, Part 137 a few years ago was very complicated because it was designed for the manned aircraft world, and then they eventually changed it so that it is simpler and more applicable to UAS. There's no reason why we can't do the same thing with Part 5.
Agreed.
That's cool. I really get this picture in my head painted of like the path that someone could take who wants to get into aviation through the drone side. My kids, even my 5-year-old son is flying little tiny drones now, and I'm gonna keep pursuing that as he's interested. But it'd be really cool for that workforce development side, Michelle, that you're gonna be talking with my sister about on an upcoming podcast. I could just like imagine the path of an individual that could take the course, get their Part 107, get the type certification for the BV loss, and then move up the chain. And then on the flip side, maybe they go work for an Amazon, a Google,
Yeah.
Walmart, and maybe then say Walmart at that time has this really robust SMS culture already, and because they're doing mass operations, having deconflict thousands and thousands of flights, far more flights than a manned aviation would have to even consider, right? I mean, like exponentially more flights deconflicting, coordinating. So they've got to have an incredibly solidified culture, which again is not quite accounted for necessarily, right, in the NPRM, because their coordinator might not have any experience at all. But now I'm kind of back to that picture in my head of this journey of that coordinator, what it could be, right, as they move through these stages, and they get exposure to different levels, and then you have these medium versions, simplified versions of things. Then that person could come back to the FAA and say, I'd like to do something slightly out of the ordinary, but I'm like this level certified and trained. I know what's going on in the airspace. Now you can trust me. They're going to listen a lot faster to new theories, new waiver
Yes.
exemptions, right? Because they're going to say, the building blocks, you've accounted for all these things. So I don't know. I could kind of imagine what you guys are talking about and how it could work. It'd be really
This is
powerful.
yeah.
Go ahead.
What you just hit on, though, is super important. You got to keep that communication line open with the FAA. You can't just assume that they're going to trust you. You can't just assume that they're going to just understand you, because everything that you're doing to prepare to get to that level, it's layers and layers and layers of decisions and training and critical thinking that they all know is required to get to that level, and they need to know that, and that it wasn't just happenstance that you ended up there. So keep that line of communication open with the FAA. Help just bring them along. They want to be brought along. They want to be able to say, Yeah, David, we've seen your progression. We've looked at your safety cases, and they've really matured. So yeah, this new waiver, we're going to cut some of those mitigations out. Nice job.
Yeah. And David, what you're talking about, by the way, is an aviation mindset. You're creating a person, you're creating an aviator that is going to, regardless of where they operate, unmanned, manned, or whatever, wherever they are, as a dispatcher, as a flight attendant, as anything else, they're going to be part of this aviation ecosystem, and they understand the ecosystem, and then they're going to move up. And as they move up, they understand the culture already. They understand that these are just not toys that are flying in the air. This is something that we've been trying to teach students for years. I'm trying to tell them, hey, you're operating your drone. I know, man, aircraft pilots make fun of drone pilots. They don't like that word, but if we don't call people pilots, they're never going to see themselves as operating an aircraft in the airspace with other people. If we keep telling them that they're flying toys, then they're going to treat them as toys, and that's not the way that we should do it. So that safety culture is super important, of having all these layers, like you mentioned. I love that.
Well, and I do a lot in the counter UAS world of what do we do with nefarious drones at a stadium. I just walked one yesterday out with a bunch of law enforcement agencies, and we were mapping the terrain in the area and looking at possible entry points for a drone. And imagine, though, if hundreds of thousands of Part 107 drone pilots and beyond, millions eventually have that serious mentality, right? Then they're going to be a lot less likely to be the careless and clueless. You're going to be able to really diminish that, because they're going to be like, no, this isn't a toy. I'm not going to just go randomly do that. I could lose my license. Like, that could hurt people. That's not safe.
I can lose my license. You said the key word here, why we need to have these people be certificated, because there is a consequence to what they're doing. Because right now, if somebody looks at this and I'm not even a pilot, I'm just pushing a button for this drone. So they don't have this involvement into the operation. That's a big thing. I'm going to lose my license should always be something in the back of your mind.
Wow, that's good. Man, we just opened a whole can of worms right at the 3 minutes past.
Part 3.
No, this is great. Absolutely. I'd love to. Well, thank you guys, both of you. Thanks, Greg, for being our guest again. Huge name in the industry. You're doing a lot of great work. If anyone listening is not familiar with Greg and the Pilot Institute, definitely go look them up. Also, 3 Mad Air. Tap into Michelle's incredible insights from all this legacy aviation and how it can apply to your drone operations today. And then, hey, join us live next week. Same time, same place at This Week in Drones. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.